the forest of echoes. There are places in this world that defy easy explanation. Ancient forests, whose roots run deeper than our oldest stories, and whose canopies have witnessed the passing of ages we can only dream of. We are taught to fear the dark, to be wary of the things that lurk in the shadows of these wild places. We call them haunted, cursed, malevolent. But what if we've been looking at it all wrong? What if the unsettling chill that runs down your spine as you walk beneath the boughs of these ancient sentinels isn't a presence of malice, but something far more profound? What if the whispers you hear on the wind are not the lamentations of lost souls, but something else entirely? This is not a story about ghosts. This is a story about a place where the past has not yet finished speaking. Welcome to the Wilderness Protocol. Tonight, we journey into a forest unlike any other. A place where every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, is a word in a story written across time. A library of echoes. And as with any library, sometimes a page gets stuck on repeat. To understand the story of Elias Vance, you must first understand the man. He was not a tourist in the wilderness. He was not a weekend warrior seeking an escape from a desk job. Elias was, for lack of a better term, a student of the wild. Born and raised in the shadow of the great peaks of the Pacific Northwest, the forest was his first language. He could read the story of a season in the rings of a fallen tree, predict the weather from the scent of the air, and understand the subtle dialogue between predator and prey written in the mud of a riverbank. He was a hunter, yes, but not in the way the modern world often pictures it. For Elias, the hunt was a pilgrimage. It was a tradition passed down from his father and his father's father before him. It was about respect, about understanding the intricate, often brutal balance of nature, and about participating in it in the most honest way he knew how. He was a pragmatist, a man grounded in the tangible world. For every shadow there was a source, for every sound, a physical cause. The world, to Elias, was a complex but ultimately knowable machine. It operated on rules of physics, biology, and instinct. He had no time for ghost stories told around a campfire. He'd spent more nights under the stars than most people have spent in their own beds, and never once had he seen or heard anything that couldn't be explained by a bear sniffing around his camp, the wind playing tricks in a canyon, or his own mind, tired and suggestible after a long day's trek. The forest was alive, certainly, but it was not sentient. It was not a keeper of secrets, or so he believed. This unwavering belief, this bedrock of rationality upon which his entire life was built, was about to be pulverized into dust. It would happen on a crisp afternoon in late October, deep within a section of national forest so remote it remained unnamed on most maps, a place the locals simply called the Deep Woods. The object of his pilgrimage this time was a magnificent bull elk he had been tracking for 2 full days. It was a ghost of an animal, smart and elusive, a true monarch of the forest. The pursuit had drawn him further than his usual territory, past the familiar ridges and into a part of the woods that felt different. The transition was subtle at first. The well-worn game trails he knew began to fade, replaced by a more primeval, untrodden landscape. The trees themselves seemed to change. The familiar Douglas firs and western hemlocks gave way to colossal, ancient cedars and redwoods, titans whose gnarled bark looked like the wrinkled skin of forgotten gods. Their canopy was so thick that it blotted out much of the afternoon sun, casting the forest floor in a perpetual state of twilight. The air changed, too. It grew still and heavy, losing the crispness of the autumn day. It was thick with the rich, loamy scent of centuries of decay, a smell that was both fertile and funereal. But it was the silence that was most profound. It wasn't the absence of noise. Elias was used to that. This was a presence of silence. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket that seemed to press in from all sides, muffling the sound of his own breathing, deadening the snap of twigs under his boots. It felt like the forest was holding its breath. He paused, leaning his rifle against the trunk of a redwood so wide it would have taken 3 men to encircle it. He pulled a canteen from his pack, taking a long, slow drink. He was a patient man. The elk was close. He could feel it. He just needed to wait, to listen, to read the chapter as it was being written. That's when he heard it. A sound so alien in this cathedral of silence that it felt like a physical blow. Elias froze, every muscle tensed. His hunter's mind immediately began to cycle through possibilities, a Rolodex of rational explanations. Animal? No. No animal made a sound like that. It was metallic. It was rhythmic. It was methodical. It was the unmistakable sound of a shovel striking dirt and rock. A cold prickle of unease traced its way up his spine. Who would be out here this deep in the woods digging a hole? A Forest Service worker? Prospector? It seemed unlikely. The sound was steady, relentless, devoid of the usual pauses for rest or changes in rhythm that accompany human labor. It had a dreadful mechanical quality to it, like a machine stuck in a single, repeating motion. His curiosity, a trait as sharp as any of his hunting knives, warred with a primal instinct that was screaming at him to turn back. This was wrong. This place, this sound, it was a discordant note in the symphony of the wild he knew so well. But the man who had tracked a wounded cougar through a blizzard was not one to be scared off by a strange noise. Gripping his rifle, he began to move toward the sound, his steps now utterly silent, a shadow moving through other shadows. The scraping grew louder, more defined. He could hear the heavy thump as the shovel bit into the earth, followed by the grating shick of it being dragged against stone. The sound seemed to be coming from a small, sunken clearing just over the next ridge. The air grew colder as he approached, a localized drop in temperature so pronounced he could see his breath misting in front of his face. It was the kind of deep, damp cold that seems to bypass your clothes and settle directly into your bones. He reached the crest of the ridge, dropping to his belly and crawling the final few feet. He peered through the fronds of a large fern, his heart hammering against his ribs. What he saw in the clearing below was not a Forest Service worker. It was not a prospector. It was a scene of such profound and desolate strangeness that it would be burned into his memory for the rest of his life. In the center of the clearing, a man was digging. He was a specter of a man, gaunt to the point of emaciation. His clothes were little more than rotted, earth-stained rags that hung from a skeletal frame. A wild, matted beard, streaked with gray and grime, obscured the lower half of his face. He moved with a frantic, desperate energy, his bony shoulders working like pistons as he drove the shovel into the ground again, and again, and again. The hole was already deep, nearly to his waist. But it was his eyes that held Elias captive. They were wide, staring, but utterly vacant. They were fixed on the growing hole in front of him with an intensity that was terrifying in its single-mindedness. There was no awareness of the forest around him, no acknowledgement of the world beyond the patch of dirt he was assaulting. He was a man in a trance, a prisoner of his own relentless task. Elias lay there for what felt like an eternity, watching this grim, silent pantomime. The sheer wrongness of it all was overwhelming. This wasn't just a man digging a hole. This was an exhibition of pure, undiluted obsession. He felt like an intruder, like he was witnessing a moment of intensely private madness. Finally, breaking through his shock, the practical side of him, the part that helps people in distress, took over. He rose slowly to his feet. "Hey!" he called out, his voice sounding unnaturally loud in the heavy silence. "You all right there, mister?" The man did not flinch. He did not pause. The rhythmic digging continued unabated, as if Elias hadn't spoken at all. It was as if he existed on a different plane of reality, a frequency Elias could see but not interact with. Elias took a few cautious steps down the slope into the clearing. The cold intensified, biting at his exposed skin. He could smell the damp, freshly turned earth, but underneath it, there was another scent, faint and hard to place. A scent of old sorrow, like a room that had been sealed for 100 years. "Hey, I'm talking to you," Elias shouted, his voice now sharp with a mixture of concern and growing fear. "What are you doing out here? There's a storm front moving in tonight." This time there was a reaction. The shovel stopped mid-swing. It clattered from the man's hands, falling silently onto the pile of excavated dirt. The sudden cessation of the sound was somehow more jarring than the noise itself. The man stood motionless in his hole for a long moment. Then, with a slowness that was agonizing to watch, he turned his head. His neck cracked audibly. His vacant, hollow eyes, set deep within dark, bruised-looking sockets, swiveled and locked onto Elias. For the first time, Elias saw his face clearly. It was a mask of unimaginable grief. The lines etched around his eyes and mouth were not from age, but from a pain so profound it had reshaped his very features. A flicker of something passed through those desolate eyes. It wasn't recognition of Elias as a person. It was something deeper, more ancient. It was like a forgotten memory briefly surfacing from the abyss. And then he spoke. His voice was not a human voice. It was a dry, rasping whisper, the sound of dust and dead leaves. It was the sound of a voice that had screamed itself raw and then been left to wither in silence for an eternity. I can't find it," the man rasped, the words seeming to tear their way out of his throat. He gestured a skeletal hand towards the hole. "I buried it. Right here. I know I did." Elias's blood ran cold. The rifle in his hands suddenly felt useless, a meaningless piece of wood and steel against whatever this was. "Buried what?" he managed to ask, his own voice now a strained whisper. The man's gaze drifted away from Elias, back to the dark, empty hole in the earth. The brief flicker of awareness was gone, replaced by a look of infinite, bottomless sorrow. A single tear traced a clean path through the grime on his cheek. "My heart," he whispered, the words barely audible. "I buried it, so I wouldn't have to feel it break again." The words hung in the frigid air, impossibly heavy. They were not the words of a madman. They were the words of a man who had suffered a loss so catastrophic, so utterly shattering, that he had performed a desperate, symbolic act to try and survive it. And some aspect of that unbearable moment had remained. Elias Vance, the pragmatist, the man of logic, stood frozen. His entire understanding of the world, of the rules that govern it, crumbled in that instant. He was not looking at a man. He was looking at a memory. He was staring at an echo of a moment of grief so powerful it had refused to fade. It had stained this small patch of earth, this forgotten corner of the forest. It had become a part of the landscape. The man in the hole seemed to shrink back into himself. His shoulders slumped. He bent down, his joints creaking, and picked up the shovel. And without another word, without another glance at Elias, he turned back to the hole and began to dig again. The dreadful, mechanical rhythm resumed, a metronome marking a moment of time that would never end. Elias could not breathe. He could not think. All he could do was back away. He moved slowly, deliberately, one step at a time, his boots making no sound on the soft earth. He did not want to startle the memory. He did not want to disturb the ghost of this grief. He backed up the slope, his eyes locked on the tragic figure in the clearing until the ferns on the ridge obscured his view. He did not turn his back. Not until he was 100 yards away. And then he walked, his pace quickening, not quite a run, but a desperate flight from a place where the laws of nature had been suspended. He didn't stop until the ancient cedars gave way to the familiar firs, until the heavy silence lifted and he could once again hear the normal sounds of the forest. He never found the elk. The hunt was over. In the years that followed, Elias Vance rarely spoke of what he saw. How could he explain it? How could he put into words the sight of a sorrow that had become a physical landmark? But it changed him. He still walked the woods, but now he walked with a new kind of reverence, a new kind of fear. He understood that the forest was more than just trees and soil. It was a witness. It was an archive, a library of every life and every death, every joy and every sorrow that had ever unfolded beneath its branches. He had not stumbled upon a haunted clearing that day. He had stumbled upon a page in that library, a page detailing a moment of such unbearable human pain that the ink had never dried. A story that had become stuck on repeat, playing its heartbreaking melody for anyone who wandered too deep into the stacks. Elias Vance, the student of the wild, had learned its most profound and terrifying lesson, that the past is never truly gone. It's just waiting to be reread. And sometimes you can still hear it, carried on the wind, the faint, rhythmic, heartbreaking sound of a shovel, digging for a heart that can never be found. An echo is not defined by the nature of its original sound. It is a neutral vessel. It carries sorrow and terror with the same fidelity as it carries joy and love. The library of the wilderness is not curated. It does not discriminate. It simply records. While Elias Vance stumbled upon a chapter of profound grief, a wound in the earth that refused to heal, our next account explores a very different kind of imprint. It poses a question. What happens when the page stuck on repeat is not one of pain, but one of pure, unadulterated happiness? And can even the most beautiful sound, when stripped of its context and repeated into the void, become a source of profound terror? This is the story of Sarah and Ben. To their friends in the city, they were the outdoorsy couple. Their apartment was decorated with framed photographs of dramatic mountain vistas and stunning sunsets. Their weekends were not spent at brunch or in bars, but on the road, their car loaded with hiking gear, chasing the green and blue patches on the map. They were collectors of experiences, seekers of that increasingly rare commodity in the modern world. Genuine, untamed quiet. In the summer of 2019, they set their sights on a sprawling section of the George Washington and Jefferson National Forests in Virginia. They had found a reference on an obscure hiking forum to an old, decommissioned logging trail that was said to lead to a series of pristine waterfalls, a place called Whispering Falls. The name itself was an invitation, a promise of the very solitude they craved. They were experienced hikers, confident in their abilities and their equipment. They believed they were prepared for anything the wilderness could throw at them. But the wilderness keeps archives they could never have imagined. The first few hours of the hike were idyllic, a perfect realization of the dream they had chased. The trail was faint as promised, often little more than a suggestion through the dense undergrowth, and this only added to their sense of adventure. The forest was thrumming with a vibrant, living energy. A symphony of life played out around them. The percussive drill of a woodpecker, the constant, gentle hum of insects, the rustle of a chipmunk skittering through the leaf litter. Sunlight filtered through the thick canopy, painting shifting patterns of light and shadow on the forest floor. They spoke in low, happy tones, pointing out a rare wildflower or the majestic spread of an old oak tree. The world of deadlines and traffic and concrete felt a million miles away. This was their church, their sanctuary. They stopped for lunch by a small, crystal-clear stream, dangling their feet in the refreshingly cold water. It was in this moment of perfect peace, with the sun warm on their faces and the sound of the stream gurgling beside them, that they first heard it. It was impossibly faint, a delicate thread of sound woven into the tapestry of the forest. It was high-pitched, joyous, and utterly unmistakable. It was the laughter of a small child. Sarah heard it first. She sat up, pulling her feet from the water, a frown creasing her brow. "Did you hear that?" she asked, her voice quiet, almost hesitant. Ben, who had been leaning back against his pack with his eyes closed, opened them. "Hear what?" "Just the birds." "No," Sarah insisted. It sounded like a little kid laughing. They both fell silent, listening intently. The forest returned to its normal chorus. The woodpecker, the insects, the stream. Nothing more. Ben shrugged, a small smile on his face. "Probably just a weird bird call. Or the wind. This place is playing tricks on you." Sarah wanted to believe him. It was the logical explanation. They hadn't seen another person since they left their car hours ago. The trail was rugged, steep in places, certainly not the kind of place you'd bring a young child. And yet, the sound had been so clear, so distinctly human. She shook her head, forcing a smile. "Yeah, must be." But as they packed up and continued their trek, a small seed of unease had been planted. The forest, which had felt so welcoming and alive just moments before, now seemed to be watching them. The shadows seemed a little deeper, the silence between the bird calls a little more profound. They had walked for another half an hour when the sound came again. This time it was closer, clearer. A bright, bubbling peal of laughter, drifting through the trees from somewhere off to their left. It was a happy sound, the kind of pure, innocent glee that should bring a smile to anyone's face. But here, in the vast, empty wilderness, it was deeply, fundamentally wrong. It was a misplaced note in the composition, a detail that didn't fit the picture. This time, Ben heard it clearly too. He stopped, scanning the dense woods. "Okay, that's weird." "I told you," Sarah said, her voice tight. "Hello," Ben called out, his voice strong but edged with uncertainty. "Is anyone there?" His call was swallowed by the forest. The only answer was the whisper of the wind through the leaves. And then, a few moments later, the laughter came again, this time from their right. It hadn't gotten any closer, but it hadn't faded either. It was as if it was circling them, a phantom playmate in a game they didn't understand. Their conversation withered. They walked on in a tense silence, their ears straining, every snap of a twig making them jump. The joy of the hike had evaporated, replaced by a cold, creeping dread. The sound became a torment. It would disappear for 10 or 15 minutes, just long enough for them to start convincing themselves they had imagined it, that it was gone for good. And then, just as their shoulders would begin to relax, it would return. A happy, carefree giggle from behind them, a delighted shriek from up ahead. It was a ghost of glee, a disembodied mirth that haunted their steps. They tried to rationalize it. Perhaps there was a cabin nearby, though their map showed nothing for miles. Perhaps another group of hikers with a child had taken a different, intersecting trail. But the sound was too mobile, too ethereal. It echoed strangely, seeming to come from all directions and none at all. It was a constant, unnerving presence, a cheerful counterpoint to their mounting fear. As the afternoon sun began to dip low, casting long, distorted shadows that looked like grasping fingers, the need to make camp became urgent. They knew that being caught on the trail in the dark, with that sound still out there, was unthinkable. They found a small, relatively flat clearing not far from the stream. They worked with a frantic, unspoken efficiency, their movements sharp and hurried. The tent was erected in record time. Ben gathered firewood, his eyes constantly scanning the darkening woods around them. They built a large, roaring fire, hoping its cheerful crackle and spitting embers could create a bulwark of sound and light against the encroaching darkness and the phantom that lurked within it. For a while it seemed to work. The warmth of the flames pushed back the evening chill, and its noise helped to drown out the smaller, more subtle sounds of the forest. They huddled close to it, trying to reclaim some of their earlier peace. But as true darkness fell, a deep, moonless black that swallowed the landscape whole, the fire's protection began to feel woefully inadequate, and the laughter returned. It was different now. In the daylight, it had been unsettling. In the pitch black of night, it was pure psychological warfare. The laughter seemed to have grown bolder, more confident. It echoed through the silent trees, the acoustics of the valley carrying the sound with terrifying clarity. The carefree glee that had once been its defining characteristic now sounded manic, unhinged. A loop of joy that had played so many times it had become monstrous. They retreated into the flimsy sanctuary of their tent, zipping the door tight as if that could keep the sound out. Couldn't. It seemed to pass through the thin nylon walls as if they weren't there. They lay in their sleeping bags, side by side in the suffocating dark, every muscle tensed. Sleep was an impossibility. The laughter never ceased. It became a form of torture. It would loop the same peal of joy over and over, then it would change to a different giggle, then a delighted shriek. There was no pattern, no rhythm, just an endless, unpredictable assault of phantom happiness. They imagined a child, running endlessly through the dark woods, laughing forever. The image was more terrifying than any monster. At one point, in the deepest hour of the night, a new sound joined the laughter. The gentle, rhythmic creak of a swing set. Creak, creak, creak. A slow, steady back and forth, accompanied by the child's delighted giggles. The sheer, impossible domesticity of that sound, here, in the heart of the wild, miles from any civilization, nearly broke them. Ben let out a small, involuntary gasp. Sarah was crying silently beside him, her body shaking. This was not a haunting. A haunting implies a presence, a will, a malevolence. This felt different, felt like a recording. A piece of the past, a powerful, emotional moment, had been captured by the landscape itself, and it was now playing back on a loop, utterly indifferent to the terror it was causing in the two souls who had stumbled into its theater. Just before dawn, as the first hint of gray light began to dilute the oppressive blackness, the laughter and the creaking of the swing stopped. Not faded away. It stopped, abruptly, as if a switch had been flipped. The sudden, absolute silence that descended upon the clearing was almost as deafening, as terrifying, as the noise had been. They lay there, not daring to move, for what felt like an hour, listening to the frantic beating of their own hearts. They didn't speak. There were no words for what they had endured. As soon as there was enough light to see, they burst from the tent and began to pack with a desperate, feverish haste. Tents were stuffed into bags. Sleeping bags rolled with trembling hands. Every normal camping task was imbued with a frantic urgency to flee. They had to get out. As Ben was dousing the last embers of the fire, Sarah, scanning the ground one last time, noticed something. A small glint of metal in the dirt near the base of a huge, ancient oak tree that bordered their clearing. It was half buried in the soil and leaf litter. Her first instinct was to ignore it, to leave. But something compelled her. She knelt down, her fingers brushing away the damp earth. She pulled it free. It was a locket, small, heart-shaped, made of silver that was heavily tarnished with age and neglect. It was attached to a broken, delicate chain. With a trembling thumb, She found the clasp and clicked it open. Inside, on the right side, protected under a small, clouded piece of plastic, was a faded, sepia-toned photograph of a young girl. She couldn't have been more than 5 or 6 years old, with bright, curious eyes and a wide, joyful smile that showed a missing front tooth. It was a smile of pure, unblemished happiness. On the left side, opposite the photo, a message had been delicately engraved into the silver. The letters were worn, but still legible in the morning light. It read, "Our dearest Lily, may your laughter forever echo in these woods." 1928. The air left Sarah's lungs in a rush. She held it out to Ben, her hand shaking uncontrollably. He took it, read the inscription, and stared at the smiling face of the little girl. And in that moment, their terror dissolved, replaced by a wave of profound, heartbreaking understanding. This wasn't a monster. It wasn't a demon. It wasn't a malicious spirit tormenting them for sport. It was Lily. It was the echo of a little girl who had loved this forest so much, who had played here, perhaps on a swing her father had hung from the branch of this very oak tree, and whose laughter had been so pure and powerful that it had fulfilled her parents' loving, sorrowful wish. It had become a permanent part of this place, a beautiful, joyful memory that had been left behind, a page of the library stuck on a beautiful, yet terrifying, repeat. Sarah took the locket back from Ben. She gently closed it, the faint click sounding loud in the morning quiet. She didn't put it in her pocket. It didn't belong to her. With a reverence that bordered on religious, she walked to the ancient oak tree and carefully placed the locket into a small hollow in its bark, returning the memory to its keeper. They left the clearing without looking back. They hiked the long miles back to their car in silence, the forest no longer seeming menacing, but filled with a deep and ancient sadness. They had sought out the wilderness to find quiet, but instead they had found an echo, a testament to a love so strong and a joy so bright. It had managed to outlive time itself, a beautiful, haunting, and eternal lullaby of laughter. The archives of the wilderness are not always written in the soft soil of gentle places. They are not always whispers of personal sorrow or phantom joy. Sometimes, the pages are etched into hard stone, carved by moments of sheer, primal terror. And sometimes these echoes serve a purpose. They are not memories for the sake of remembering. They are warnings. They are functional, protective scars left on the landscape. They are alarms set by a tragedy long past, waiting for the right conditions to sound again. To understand this, we must turn our attention to Marcus Thorne. Marcus was not a poet or a philosopher of the wild. He was its custodian. A 20-year veteran of the National Park Service, he was a man forged by the harsh beauty of the desert. His face was a roadmap of laugh lines and sun squints, his hands calloused from work, his gaze steady and calm. He was a man of procedure, of protocols, of search grids and weather reports. He had rescued stranded hikers, treated rattlesnake bites, and tracked down lost children. He operated on a foundation of observable fact. In his world, danger had a name: dehydration, hypothermia, flash flood, human error. There was no room in his lexicon for the preternatural. His station was a small, solitary outpost on the edge of a vast, labyrinthine canyon system in Utah. It was a place of breathtaking beauty and lethal indifference. The canyons, carved by millennia of water and wind, could go from bone dry to a raging torrent in a matter of minutes. The weather was a fickle, violent god. Marcus knew its moods intimately. He could smell a coming storm on the wind, feel the drop in barometric pressure in his joints. He respected the danger, but he did not fear it in a superstitious way. He saw it as a series of predictable, if powerful, variables. On a sweltering afternoon in late August, Those variables began to align in a way that made the hairs on his arms stand up. A monstrous thunderhead, the color of a deep bruise, had been building over the high desert to the west all day. It was moving faster than predicted, a churning anvil of atmospheric fury. Marcus was in his office, finishing up paperwork, the drone of the air conditioner a stark contrast to the oppressive heat outside, when the radio crackled to life. The voice on the other end was young, panicked, and broken by static. "Mayday, anyone read me? This is hiker Alex, can copy." Marcus was instantly at the console, his pen clattering to the desk. "This is Ranger Station 4. I read you, Alex. Your signal is weak. What is your situation? Over." The voice returned, strained and desperate. "Lost," followed a dry wash. "Walls are high. My phone is dead. GPS was on. Sent coordinates before it. Storm looks bad. Really bad. Over." Marcus's heart sank. A dry was Honoroyo was the single worst place to be with a storm like this on the horizon. It was a natural funnel. He looked at the coordinates. The hiker's phone had managed to ping to the emergency network just before dying. Section 12 Bravo. A notoriously confusing network of slot canyons locally known as the Maze. "Copy that, Alex," Marcus said, his voice a model of calm professionalism he did not feel. "I have your location. The most important thing is to get to high ground immediately. Do you understand? Climb. Get out of the wash. I am on my way. Over." There was no reply, only the hiss of static. The connection was gone. Marcus didn't waste a second. He grabbed his heavy-duty pack, stocked for exactly this scenario with ropes, first aid, water, and emergency flares. He pulled on his worn leather boots, his movements economical and swift. As he stepped outside, the world felt different. The air, once scorching, now had a strange, cool charge to it. The wind was picking up, whipping dust into dancing devils. The sky to the west was a terrifying wall of dark purple and angry gray, and he could hear the first distant, rumbling growl of thunder. He was in a race, not just against the fading daylight, but against the storm itself. He drove as far as the truck could manage, then continued on foot. The entrance to the canyon system was like a wound in the earth. He descended into the shadows, the roar of the wind on the plains above quieting to a low, mournful howl that echoed off the canyon walls. The temperature dropped significantly. The air was thick, humid, tasting of ozone and wet dust. He navigated the twisting passages with the practiced ease of long experience, his eyes scanning for any sign of the lost hikara footprint, a dropped water bottle, anything. The rock walls rose hundreds of feet on either side of him, stained with dark vertical stripes of desert varnish, evidence of countless past floods. He was moving deeper into the belly of the beast. The rain began. It wasn't a drizzle. It was a sudden, violent downpour. Fat, cold drops that splattered against the stone and instantly began to darken the sandy floor of the wash. He pulled the hood of his rain jacket over his head and pressed on, his flashlight cutting a sharp, white beam through the growing gloom. That's when he heard it. Over the sound of the wind and the drumming rain, another sound emerged. It was a voice, a woman's voice, sharp with urgency. She shouted a single, clear word. "Go!" Marcus stopped dead in his tracks, his headlamp freezing on the slick rock wall in front of him. He held his breath, listening. He was alone. He knew he was. Alex was miles ahead, and there were no other hikers registered for this section. It had to be the wind, a strange echo, the sound of the gale being twisted and shaped by the unique geology of the canyon. It was a known phenomenon. He had heard it before. He dismissed it, shaking his head at his own frayed nerves, and continued his advance. The wash was narrowing now, becoming a true slot canyon. In some places, he could touch both walls with his outstretched arms. The rain was coming down harder, and a trickle of water was beginning to snake its way along the canyon floor, pooling around his boots. The voice came again, louder this time, more insistent. It didn't seem to come from a specific direction, but from all around him, as if the rock itself were speaking. Go! A knot of cold, primal fear tightened in his gut. This was different. This wasn't a trick of the wind. It was too clear, too human, too full of command. "Alex?" he shouted, his voice swallowed by the narrow passage. "Is that you, Alex?" His only reply was the escalating roar of the storm. And then the voice, again and again, a frantic, looping mantra of pure warning. Go! 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 He felt a sudden, overwhelming sense of claustrophobia. The walls seemed to be closing in, the sky a tiny, dark slit far above. The voice was no longer just a sound he heard with his ears. It was a command he felt in his bones, a physical pressure pushing him, urging him, begging him to turn back. His training, his experience, his mission, all of it screamed at him to push forward, to find the hiker. But an instinct older and deeper than any training was screaming at him to flee. He swept his headlamp beam up the walls of the canyon, searching for an escape route, for some handholds to climb. And that's when his light caught on something that did not belong. Wedged high above him, perhaps 40 feet up, caught in a permanent chokehold by the jaws of the canyon, was the front half of a pickup truck. It was an old model from the 60s or 70s, its paint faded to a dull, rusted red. It was mangled, crushed, and twisted almost beyond recognition, a metal skeleton that told a story of unimaginable violence. It looked like it had been there for decades, a forgotten tombstone in this remote cathedral of stone. And in that instant, everything clicked into place. The voice, the frantic warning, the escalating storm, the truck. He understood. This wasn't a ghost haunting him. It was a recording. He was standing in the exact spot where a past tragedy had unfolded. A flash flood, just like the one that was now brewing, had roared through this very canyon decades ago. He could picture it. This truck, caught in the rising water, the driver, the passengers, the woman. A woman screaming a final, desperate warning to summon a husband, a child, anyone who might have been able to escape before the wall of water had hit, hurling the truck up and wetting it into the rock like a nail driven by the fist of God. Go! The voice was a shriek now, a raw, piercing scream of pure, undiluted terror. It was the sound of a last breath being spent on a final, futile warning. It was the echo of death itself. Marcus Thorne, the man of logic and procedure, did not hesitate. He did not second-guess. He listened. He turned and scrambled back the way he had come, abandoning all thought of finding Alex from this direction. The water on the canyon floor was no longer a trickle. It was a churning, ankle-deep river, pulling at his boots. He scrambled over rocks, his lungs burning, his heart hammering against his ribs. The woman's final scream seemed to chase him, pushing him onward. He reached a wider section of the canyon and saw a fissure, a steep channel of tumbled rock leading upwards. He began to climb, pulling himself up hand over hand, his fingers raw against the wet, gritty sandstone. He was 20 feet up when a sound unlike any other filled the world, a deep, guttural roar that vibrated through the very stone he was clinging to. He looked back down the narrow passage he had just fled. A wall of churning brown death, a liquid bulldozer of water, mud, boulders, and entire juniper trees, exploded into the canyon. It filled the space where he had been standing only moments before, a force so absolute and destructive it would have obliterated him without a trace. He clung there, drenched and shaking, long after the main torrent had passed, listening to the rumble of the water slowly subside. He had been saved. Saved by a voice from a grave. Saved by a page of the library, stuck on repeat. He eventually found another, safer route to the higher ground of the canyon rim. As the storm passed and the setting sun broke through the clouds, he began a systematic search. He found Alex 2 hours later, huddled under a rock overhang, soaked and hypothermic, but alive. As Marcus wrapped him in an emergency blanket, the young hiker looked at him with wide, haunted eyes. "The voice," Alex said, his teeth chattering. "Did you hear it? A woman shouting. It scared the hell out of me. I thought I was going crazy, but I climbed. I didn't know what else to do." Marcus looked out over the vast, now quiet canyon system, a place he thought he knew so well. He put a steadying hand on the boy's shoulder. "Yeah," he said, his own voice hoarse. "I heard her." He never filed a full report of what happened that day. He couldn't. The official record states that Ranger Thorne, acting on his expert knowledge of meteorology and the local terrain, correctly anticipated the flash flood and located the hiker on high ground. But Marcus knew the truth. He knew that his expertise had been guided by something else. He had been given a warning, a gift of terror from a long-dead soul whose final moment of sacrifice had been so powerful, so selfless, that it had been burned into the very fabric of the place she had died. An echo, waiting patiently in the stone, for the rain to come again. A repeating warning. The world is a manuscript, written and rewritten over eons. The mountains are its crumpled pages, the rivers its flowing script, and the forests, the ancient forests, are its libraries. They are repositories of every story that has ever unfolded beneath their boughs. We walk through these hallowed aisles, often deaf to the volumes of history that surround us, blind to the tales written in the bark of trees and the whispers of the wind. We have been taught to interpret the unexplained as the malicious, to label the chill on our spine as a haunting, the sound in the dark as a threat. But tonight we have considered a different possibility, a truth that is perhaps more profound and more unsettling than any simple ghost story. We journeyed with Elias Vance, a man of logic and reason, into a part of the forest so old it seemed to have a memory of its own. There he did not find a ghost. He found a wound, a moment of grief so catastrophic, so absolute, that it refused to fade. He became the unwilling audience to a private, heartbreaking performance, the echo of a man forever digging for the heart he buried, a page of sorrow stuck on a relentless, agonizing repeat. With Sarah and Ben, we felt the sun on our faces and the vibrant life of a summer wood, only to have that peace shattered by a sound that should have been beautiful. The phantom laughter of a child, a recording of pure joy that, when stripped of its context and replayed into the lonely dark, became a symphony of terror. They did not flee from a malevolent spirit, but from the echo of a love so powerful it fulfilled a parent's wish, a wish that their daughter's happiness would forever resonate in the place she loved. A beautiful yet terrifying lullaby. And with Marcus Thorne, we raced against a gathering storm and into the jaws of the earth itself. He was not pursued by a demon, but guided by an angel of memory. He was saved by the final, frantic scream of a woman who died decades ago, her last act of love and sacrifice, a desperate warning so potent that it was imprinted onto the very stone. An echo that became a functional alarm, a protective scar on the landscape, forever screaming its caution against the fury of the flood. A broken heart, a child's laughter, a final scream. These are not hauntings. They are imprints, powerful emotional events, moments of extreme human experience that have left a residue in the physical world. The forest, with its ancient trees like antennae and its deep, silent earth like a recording medium, becomes a library of these echoes. It remembers, It archives our moments of greatest intensity. It suggests a reality far stranger than one filled with wandering souls. It suggests that we, ourselves, leave a part of our story behind. That our strongest emotions can resonate long after our bodies have turned to dust. That the landscape itself is a silent witness that sometimes, just sometimes, decides to speak. So the next time you walk in the deep woods, when you leave the noise of the modern world behind and enter that profound, ancient silence, listen. Listen past the birdsong, past the rustle of leaves, past the sound of your own heartbeat. What stories are being told around you, just beyond the edge of your hearing? When a sudden, inexplicable sadness washes over you, are you brushing past a page of grief? When an unexpected chill runs down your arm on a warm day, have you wandered into an echo of fear? This forest isn't haunted. It is a library of echoes. And understanding this doesn't have to be a source of fear. It can be a source of connection. A connection to the countless lives that walked the same path before you. A connection to the raw, untamed power of human emotion, and a connection to the wild earth that holds all of our stories in its patient, timeless embrace. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the stacks of the world's oldest library. The wilderness is full of stories waiting to be told, and mysteries waiting to be explored. If you have had an experience, an unexplained moment in a wild place that has stayed with you, we invite you to share it with our community in the comments below. And if you wish to continue exploring the protocols and phenomena of the wild, please consider subscribing to the channel and enabling notifications so you don't miss our next expedition. Until next time, stay safe and listen to the echoes.